welcome back to Spring into Math 7. I'm Mrs. Campbell. Today we're going to be talking about the definition of probability. Let's jump in. So what is probability? Well, probability is the likelihood that an event will occur. You might want to write that definition down in your math notebook. We're going to be talking about it for a while. It's a mathematical way of calculating how likely an event is likely to occur. Now, an event, another important term to write down, is a result of an experiment or an activity that might include things such as flipping a coin, spinning a spinner, rolling a number cube or a die, or choosing an item from a jar or a bag. Now, how do we calculate probability? Well, we calculate probability by looking at the ratio of favorable outcomes or successes, what we want, to total outcomes in a given situation. So in ratio form, the probability of an event looks like this. P, which is the event, the probability of the event equals favorable outcomes, the ratio of favorable outcomes to total outcomes. Again, you might want to write that ratio, definitely you want to write down in your math notebook. Okay, so once again, an outcome is a possible result of some event occurring. So for example, when you flip a coin, heads is one outcome, tails is a second outcome. And then total outcomes are computed by simply counting all the possible outcomes. Keep in mind, and this is important as you go through this concept, that all outcomes that are used, they're presumed to be fair. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, like when you flip a coin, the outcomes of heads or tails, they are equally likely. When you spin a spinner, sections of all sets, we're assuming that the sections are all of equal size and equally likely to be landed on. When you toss a die or a number cube, faces of the cube are the same size and again, equally likely to be landed on, and so on. Just wanted to say that. Here are some examples. For flipping a coin, total outcomes equals heads and tails. So you have two total outcomes when you're flipping a coin. Tossing a number cube, how many total outcomes? Well, 6, because there's 1 through 6 on a die. For selecting a day of the week, how many total outcomes? Well, there's 7 total outcomes because there's Monday through Sunday. There's 7 days in a week. Favorable outcomes are specific outcomes you are looking for. You definitely want to write that one down in your math notebook as well. For flipping a coin and having it come up heads. So if we were wanting heads, that would be the favorable outcome. So if the favorable outcomes are heads and tails, you have one favorable outcome because you're hoping that it's heads. For tossing a number cube and having it come up with an even number. Well, how many even numbers are there? 2, 4, 6. So there's 3 favorable outcomes. What about randomly choosing a date and having it land on a weekday? Well, there's 5 favorable outcomes because there's 5 weekdays. It's actually pretty simple. To write a ratio, we compare the favorable outcomes to the total outcome, or the favorable outcome to the total outcome. So total outcome. So comparing favorable outcomes to possible total outcomes is what we call theoretical probability, and we're going to be talking a lot about that, so you definitely want to write that term down as well. Now that you know how to think about theoretical probability, we can look at calculating some simple probabilities. Remember that we're going to be writing ratios that compare favorable outcomes to total outcomes. So the probability of any event is going to be written as P and then the event. So here are some examples. PA, that's the probability that event A will occur. P heads, that would be the probability that heads will come up on a flipped coin. P5, that's the probability that a number cube or a die will turn up a 5. Let's look at an example. What's the probability of flipping heads on a coin? Now you might be able to do this one in your head, but we'll just start simple. To work through this probability, we're going to be writing a ratio that compares the number of favorable outcomes with the total number of outcomes. Favorable outcome is 1, since there's 1 heads on a coin or 1 head. And total outcomes would be 2, because there's a possibility of head or tails. And the answer is 1 to 2. This one's a little bit harder, but I still think it's pretty simple. For tossing a number cube and having it land on an even number. So the probability of it being even equals favorable outcomes to total outcomes. You might want to commit that ratio to memory. It'll really help you in the long run. There are 3 favorable numbers, again, because there's 3 even numbers, 2, 4, 6, and the ratio to 6 total outcomes would be 3 to 6, and then once we simplify, it's 1 to 2. So our final answer is 1 to 2. So to find any probability, just follow these simple steps below. And if you want to write them down, pause your video and jot them down. It might be a great idea. Here's a problem. You can use this as an example. What is the probability of an arrow landing on a yellow section? Well, step 1, we want to count the number of favorable outcomes. So there's 2 yellow spaces, let's say, on our spinner. So our number of favorable outcomes would be 2. The next thing we would want to do is count the number of total outcomes. So let's pretend on that spinner that there's 5 total spaces in all. So the total outcomes would be 5. And step 3 would be to write the ratio of favorable outcomes to total outcomes. So the probability of it being yellow, of it landing on yellow, equals the ratio of favorable outcomes to total outcomes, which is 2 to 5. And that's it. That's the simplest thing ever. Hope you enjoyed this video, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.